The sun peeked over the canopy of oaks lining our idyllic neighborhood. Its warmth, unwelcome today. The morning air was still, save for the rustle of leaves whispering secrets best left undisturbed. My little corner of suburbia was usually a serene sanctuary, a haven away from the frenzied world. But peace can be as fragile as the first frost-coated leaves of autumn. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the Homeowners Association, had been busy. Her presence was as predictable as the changing seasons, yet as disruptive as an uninvited storm. She wore her authority like an ill-fitting crown, always teetering yet never quite falling. It started with a letter, slipped under my door with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Its tone was as sharp as winter's chill, demanding that I remove the eyesore from my yard. She meant the small wildflower garden I had cultivated, a splash of color in a world of manicured monotony. To me, it was a rebellion against uniformity, a reminder of nature's whims. To Karen, it was chaos personified. I read her demands with a bemused detachment, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. A garden, I mused, was hardly cause for such uproar, but Karen's grievances were like clockwork, ticking away quietly until they reached a crescendo of complaint. A knock on my door next, more insistent than the last, as if to hammer her point home. I opened it to find her standing there, arms crossed like a sentinel guarding the gates of conventionality. Her eyes, pools of righteous indignation, bore into mine. She pointed vaguely towards my garden, her silent censure hanging in the air like a fog that refused to lift. I nodded politely, a gentle acknowledgement that suggested nothing. Her words were unnecessary, her intent was clear, yet within me, a quiet rebellion brewed, a resolve as firm as oak roots. I wouldn't uproot the garden. It was a small stand against the encroaching demands of uniformity. But I never spoke of the other garden, the one tended by hands not my own, hidden beneath the vines of everyday life. My secret, my team as I called them in jest, remained unseen, a precaution for another life, a different reality. They had adapted to suburban life with remarkable ease, blending into the tapestry of ordinary days. Their presence, a shadowy dance behind the scenes, was my unspoken shield. The irony was not lost on me. A neighborhood busybody oblivious to the quiet machinations of my clandestine companions. To Karen, everyone was but a player in her own stage production, never suspecting that some scripts held more than she could ever imagine. Returning to the present, I watched from the window as she huffed back to her domain, her frustration palpable. Her demands would mount like the coming winter's snow, layer upon layer of icy persistence. But for now, my garden stood defiantly, a splash of rebellious color against the gray canvas of conformity. It was a quiet victory, unspoken and uncelebrated, but it was mine. The wildflowers nodded in agreement, their petals unfurling like flags of silent defiance. As I turned away, I couldn't help but smile. The storm was brewing, and the winds of change carried with them whispers of an unexpected reckoning. The sun had barely crested the horizon when the first missive arrived, a neat envelope, stark white against the dew-kissed grass, lay waiting at my doorstep like an unwelcome specter. Inside, a letter adorned with the HOA's crest and Karen's unmistakably precise handwriting. The ink danced on the page, unraveling a litany of infractions, each more absurd than the last. The meticulous angles of my hedges, once praised, were now deemed a violation of community aesthetic harmony. A whimsical garden gnome, a gift from an old friend, was declared an unauthorized decorative element, and, in a masterful stroke of audacious creativity, the color of my front door, a deep, resolute blue, was now offensive to the neighborhood's sensibilities. Karen's pen had struck with the precision of a surgeon and the mercy of a vengeful deity. As I read, I felt the weight of absurdity sinking into my bones. Each citation was a pebble in the cascading avalanche of Karen's campaign, threatening to bury my patience. I could almost hear her voice. each infraction delivered with the self-satisfied air of someone convinced they were doing the world a favor. The neighborhood began to buzz. Karen's whispers spread like wildfire in a drought-stricken field, igniting curious glances and hushed conversations at the local coffee shop. The air was thick with it, a palpable tension that clung to the morning air. Faces I had known for years now bore expressions of uncertainty, as if questioning the once solid foundations of our shared existence. My Secret Service team, ever vigilant yet unobtrusive, watched with quiet amusement. They were shadows at the edge of perception, invisible to all but the keenest of eyes. They moved with the grace of dancers, their presence a silent testament to the absurdity of the situation. I wondered if they found this suburban theater as ironically entertaining as I did. Karen's latest machinations were clever. I had to admit, she wielded the HOA rulebook like a knight brandishing a sword, each citation a calculated thrust aimed at the heart of my peace. I marveled at her dedication, a relentless pursuit of an ill-defined justice. But there was an art to deflecting such attacks, a dance of patience and subtlety that I had mastered over the years. As the sun climbed higher, I pondered my next move. It would not be retaliation in kind. That was not my way. Instead, I would allow the storm to blow itself out, to exhaust its fury until it was nothing more than a whisper on the wind. I had seen storms before tempests, far more fearsome than this. Karen's escalation was a test of resolve, a trial by fire in the quiet battleground of suburbia. Yet I felt no anger. There was only a serene acceptance, a realization that this was but another chapter in the grand tapestry of life's unpredictable narrative. The game was afoot, and I intended to play it with grace and quiet dignity. The envelope lay discarded on the table, a relic of a morning that had already begun to fade into memory. I watched as the light refracted through the window, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the floor. My heart beat with a steady cadence, unfazed and unwavering. The storm was not yet over, but I had no doubt that the winds would soon shift in my favor. For days, the air was thick with an unspoken tension, like the stillness before a storm. Karen's demands still echoed in my mind, a persistent drumbeat of audacity and entitlement. The neighborhood had become a chessboard, with each lawn, each porch, a square where moves were being calculated in silence. I began documenting everything, every sneer she threw my way, every time her eyes lingered too long on my property, every whispered conversation she had with the other HOA members. I captured it all, each note a brushstroke in my careful portrait of her pettiness. The irony was delicious. Her attempts to control, to command, were now just ammunition in the quiet battle I was orchestrating. My Secret Service team, always discreet, had become shadows beneath the sun. They moved with the kind of practiced stealth that turned heads away rather than toward them. To the casual observer, they were simply neighbors, walking dogs, mowing lawns. But to me, they were my knights, my rooks, silently fortifying my position. The plan was subtle, as all good plans are. There was no need for grand gestures or public confrontations. Instead, I laid the groundwork for a more elegant denouement. I knew that Karen thrived on spectacle. She wanted drama, a scene where she could play the victim, the martyr of her self-imposed tyranny. I would offer her no such stage. Her latest letter, slipped under my door like a venomous snake, lay open on my kitchen table. It was filled with the usual platitudes about community standards and respect, underscored by a veiled threat of further action if I did not submit to her will. I reread it, noting the exaggerations, the twisted truths, each word a testament to her desperation. I calmly penned my response. It was concise, a masterpiece of understatement. I informed her of the documentation I had gathered, implying its potential to unveil the truth behind her manipulations. I mentioned the legal counsel I had consulted. Not a threat, but a simple fact. Most importantly, I extended an invitation for a resolution, a concession she would find hard to refuse without revealing her own duplicity. The day of our meeting arrived, bathed in the golden light of an early autumn afternoon. Karen approached with her usual briskness, a self-assured air masking the undercurrent of anxiety I could sense beneath her facade. The setting was perfect neutral ground. My garden, which she had so vehemently sought to control. The irony was not lost on me. As she stood before me, I could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, a fleeting shadow that told me she understood, on some level, the precariousness of her position. I handed her my response, a simple envelope that now felt weighted with the gravity of our exchange. Her eyes scanned the letter, and for a moment, the world held its breath. When she looked up, her expression was inscrutable, a mask of practiced neutrality, but the storm in her eyes told another story, a realization, perhaps, that her reign had met an unexpected resistance, a reminder that power is only as strong as the truth it conceals. The silence between us was thick, nearly tangible, and in that moment, there was nothing more to say. She turned, her departure marked by a stiffness in her step, an uncharacteristic hesitation. As I watched her walk away, I felt a calmness settle over me, the kind that comes from knowing the game has changed, and the board now favored a different player. The garden, once a battleground, now seemed peaceful, a place where roots could grow deep and strong, undisturbed by the whims of those who sought to dominate. It was a quiet victory, the kind that doesn't need applause to be felt, and in the end, that was enough. The afternoon sun draped its warm, golden cloak across the neighborhood, casting long shadows that seemed to mock the earlier chaos. I stood at the window, the glass cool against my fingertips, watching as Karen marched back to her house, her shoulders tight with unspent fury. Her silhouette was a dark blot in the pastel tranquility of suburbia. It started with whispers, the kind that ripple quietly but persistently, like the rustle of leaves on a restless breeze. Neighbors, drawn by the spectacle that had unfolded, lingered on their porches, their eyes flitting between my house and Karen's, as if expecting an encore to the earlier confrontation. The air buzzed with a silent anticipation, each moment pregnant with potential conflict. My Secret Service team moved with practiced discretion, their presence a subtle undercurrent. To the casual observer, they were invisible, just ordinary figures blending into the backdrop. But to Karen, they were a provocation, a testament to boundaries she could not cross. I had seen the way her eyes narrowed, calculating, searching for a foothold in a battle she was destined to lose. The neighborhood was a stage, and every glance, every whispered conversation was a part of the play. There was a certain irony in how Karen had sought to dominate this space, yet now found herself cast as the antagonist in a drama of her own making. Her attempts to assert control were met with quiet defiance, the kind that speaks louder than any shout. Inside, the air was thick with an unspoken tension, the kind that settles in your chest like a coiled spring. I moved from room to room, the rhythmic thud of my footsteps a steadying cadence. Each step was a reminder of my resolve, of the line I had drawn in the sand with Karen's name etched defiantly across it. Outside, the curious throng grew. Their curiosity piqued, drawn to the unfolding spectacle like moths to a flame. I caught snippets of their conversations, fragments of speculation and judgment, each piece fitting into the larger puzzle of neighborhood dynamics. They were watching, waiting, their eyes a chorus of silent questions. Karen's house stood like a fortress, her domain, and yet she was not the queen she believed herself to be. I imagined her inside, pacing like a caged animal, her mind a whirl of schemes and retaliations. There was a certain satisfaction in knowing she was unsettled, her carefully constructed facade cracking under the weight of her own hubris. The sun dipped lower, The sky a canvas of bruised oranges and purples. Twilight was my ally, its shadows softening the edges of reality, blurring the lines between what was and what could be. I leaned against the porch railing, feeling the rough wood beneath my palms, and let the cool evening air wash over me. In the distance, a dog barked, its voice carrying across the quiet streets, a mundane sound, yet in the charged atmosphere, it felt like a herald of change. I watched as lights flickered on in houses, one by one, a constellation of domesticity against the encroaching night. Karen's fury was a tempest contained within the walls of her house, but outside there was a calm, a sense of inevitability. The neighborhood was a living entity, its pulse steady and sure, a counterpoint to her chaos. I was part of it, an integral thread in the tapestry, and I would not be unwoven. As the last vestiges of daylight surrendered to the night, I turned from the scene, stepping back inside, where the world was. For the moment, quieter, my sanctuary, my domain, untouched by Karen's machinations. The stage was set, and as I closed the door, I knew the story was far from over. The evening sun cast a golden hue over the neighborhood, sharpening the contrast between shadows and light. It was the kind of quiet suburb where the rustle of leaves could be a symphony if one listened closely enough. But under that serene facade lay the simmering tension of a community whose harmony had been disrupted by the relentless demands of a formidable force, HOA Karen. Her final edict had been clear. My yard, she claimed with all the self-appointed authority of a minor despot, violated some obscure covenant. She demanded I depart, leave the premises. The memory of her screech still echoed, although it had been days since the confrontation, days during which I had calmly, methodically, prepared my response. I sat by the window, the legal documents spread out before me like a chessboard, each one a move in a game Karen didn't even realize she was playing. My team, a cadre of sharp-suited professionals, had been quietly assembling the pieces, but now it was time for me to make the decisive move. There's a certain poetry in the law, an elegant structure, each clause and statute a brushstroke on the canvas of justice, and within this tapestry, I found the precision I needed. Karen had overstepped bounds defined not by her whims, but by the very bylaws she so fervently championed. Her demands had become her Achilles' heel. I breathed deeply, savoring the calm before the storm. The irony wasn't lost on me. The documents I held were not just paper, they were a mirror, reflecting back the image of a woman blinded by her own hubris, a testament to the quiet power of restraint and precision over bluster and bravado. The crackle of autumn leaves beneath tires signaled the arrival of my legal team. They moved with the quiet confidence of those accustomed to the subtle interplay of power and discretion. No grand proclamations, just the measured cadence of professionals who understood the art of quiet dominance. Together, we laid our plans, each step methodically precise. It was in this moment of poised anticipation that the phone call came. Her voice, a brittle veneer of civility barely masking the edge of desperation. She had heard news travels fast in close-knit communities, faster still when carried on the hushed whispers of curious neighbors. Her words were clipped, as though she might shatter under their weight. It was ironic, really, how quickly the winds had shifted, how the titan of the HOA now stood on fragile ground. But I held my silence. Let her words fill the space between us like smoke. A pause. Then the call ended, leaving behind the echo of a battle she knew was lost. The evening deepened, shadows elongating, the quietude of the neighborhood once more asserting itself. I watched as the street lamps flickered to life, their glow casting a gentle illumination over the scene. Karen had built her empire on the sands of arbitrary rules. I, however, had built my response on the bedrock of law, and in that quiet victory, I found a sense of peace. Some battles aren't won with swords or shouted commands. Sometimes the most potent weapon is patience and a well-timed legal document. Karen's voice had been silenced, a distant echo in the corridors of our neighborhood that once reverberated with her demands. The clouds of conflict seemed to lift as the community began to breathe again. It wasn't the kind of victory one celebrates with fanfare, but rather in the quiet corners of one's heart. The days following our last encounter were marked by a serene normalcy. I woke up each morning to the soft rustle of leaves against the window, the sun weaving golden threads through the fabric of our new reality. My Secret Service team, now more like discreet guardians than a full-blown operation, blended seamlessly into the background. They were the silent observers, ever watchful yet invisible. My yard, once the battleground of rigid rules and invasive inspections, had transformed into a haven of tranquility. I walked barefoot on the dewy grass, feeling the earth's pulse beneath my feet. The garden was a riot of colors, a celebration of life that seemed to bloom defiantly against the backdrop of our past struggles. Each flower, each leaf, whispered a story of resilience. The neighborhood, once a tapestry of whispered complaints and furtive glances, began to stitch itself back together. Neighbors became confidants, laughter filled the air, and fences were no longer symbols of division, but lines of connection. In the absence of Karen's overbearing presence, we rediscovered the simple joy of community. Yet, Karen still lingered in the shadows, her influence waning, but not entirely gone. She had retreated into a silence that was both unsettling and liberating. Her gaze, when it met mine across the street or from behind drawn curtains, was a mix of defiance and resignation. We never spoke, both of us locked in a silent truce, a dance of unspoken words and unresolved tensions. In the quiet of the evening, as I sat on my porch watching the world settle into dusk, I reflected on the journey, the twists and turns, the unexpected alliances, the strength found in unity. My Secret Service team, now a part of my life like the very air I breathed, had shown me the power of discretion, the elegance of quiet strength. As the stars twinkled into existence, I felt a shift within, an understanding that the real victory was not in outsmarting Karen, but in reclaiming our space, our peace. It was in the smiles of children playing freely, the nod of acknowledgement from neighbors, the gentle hum of a community restored. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic curtain call, just a subtle realignment of lives once thrown off course by the whims of a single, albeit formidable, force. Karen, once the architect of chaos, had become a footnote in our story, a reminder of the battles fought and the strength to remain true to oneself. In the end, it was about reclaiming what was always ours, the right to live, to breathe, to grow without the weight of unnecessary judgment. The world spun on, indifferent yet oddly comforting in its constancy, as we made peace with the past and embraced the possibilities of tomorrow. And as for Karen, she remained a mystery, a storm that had raged and passed, leaving in its wake a landscape more vibrant, more alive than before. We had survived, and in doing so, found a new kind of freedom.